Hi folks, welcome back. This video is about the chart. The chart is this big diagram that allows us to categorize where sentences go, what their logical profile is, whether they count as necessarily true or contingently false, etc. Before we get to that, we need to review a couple of critical concepts. So before we talk about the chart, I want you to solve this problem. Pause your videos and decide for each of these sentences which ones are literals or not. Okay, that was your chance to pause your videos. Now we're going to talk about the answer. What is a literal? A literal, there's two things that are literals. All atomic sentences are literals, and then the negation of atomic sentences are literals, and nothing else is a literal. So A, that's an atomic sentence, that's a literal. This is a conjunction, this is a complex sentence, so it's not a literal. Here's a literal, because this is just the negation of an atomic sentence. Now, not B, this one's tricky. It looks like the negation of an atomic sentence, but this extra negation is the problem. This is a negation of an atomic sentence, which is not the same thing as just a negation of an atomic sentence. So that's not a literal. Furthermore, the concept of literals, we're going to mostly talk about it with the language of Boole. So that's why you just have to worry about A and not B, things like that. I threw this extra one in here just to see if I could trip you up. This, technically speaking, is a literal, but of course it's not really a literal of Boole. This is a literal of English, because this is an atomic sentence. Something is an atom, it's an atomic sentence if there's no more fundamental sentence inside of it. See, these complex sentences, like not be, that has an atomic sentence as a part, namely be. And this conjunction is a complex sentence. It has atomic sentences as parts. But pia, the parts of this, the pia or the identity relation is, and pia, these are not sentences. So this really is a fundamental atomic sentence. There's no sentential parts to this thing. This just says pia is pia, or pia is identical to herself. But again, I just threw that in there to make you realize identity makes for atomic sentences, because we're going to talk about that later on in the course. And the concept of atomic sentences could apply to English too. It doesn't just have to apply to formal languages. But don't worry if you got that one wrong, because we're really going to just talk about atomic sentences with Boole, and the concept of literals applies to Boole most specifically. Okay, so neither of these is literals because they have too much complexity. One other thing I want to just put on your radar so you're familiar with it is our language, like using tilde for negation and the ampersand for conjunction and this little V for disjunction. This is one convention, but there are literally dozens of different formalizations of logic. The exact same concepts can be put in many different forms. Like instead of tilde, this little sort of elbowy thing is a common form for negation, and the up wedge is common for conjunction. So this is the same as the and then this sort of down wedge, it looks like a lot like V, but technically speaking, this is a symbol. This is just another common variation. In fact, besides down wedge, really common in computer programming is to use this vertical stroke for disjunction, or some languages require two strokes. So there are just many different equivalent ways of writing the same thing that we're using these symbols for. I'll tell you, I chose these symbols just so that they're really easy to type with a standard keyboard, even a keyboard on a telephone, which is not the case for some of these other symbols. And also because they're readily understandable, like using ampersand for and makes a whole lot of sense. But if you see any of these other symbols, you should realize the things you're learning in this class applies exactly to all this stuff. It's just the same. So know that the stuff you're learning here actually applies more broadly than it might at first seem. You might think it's weird that there's so many equivalent languages, but really just think of it like computer programming languages. There's many different computer programming languages, and we're never going to like all agree to use the same language. And in fact, all of that diversity is good and healthy for development. So there's never going to be agreement. All logicians are never going to agree to use the same symbols. They're just too curmudgeonly of a bunch. Okay, let's talk about the chart then. This is our main goal for today, because this chart summarizes in one place many of the key concepts of the course. One thing is it combines the concepts of necessity and contingency. So some sentences are contingently true. They would go in this space here. Some sentences are contingently false. They would go over in all this space around here. Now, the necessities are things that would go in either this circle or this circle, because things can be necessarily false would go over here, or necessarily true would go over here. Now, we also have a more specific concept. of sentences that are necessarily true because of the truth functional connectives. Those are the tautologies. So this is a subset of all the logical truths or necessary truths. Remember, I'm just using necessary truth and logical truth synonymously. But tautologies, that's a separate concept, and it's a more specific concept. Tautologies are a species of the genus logical truth, if you like your biology terms. Tautologies, see, logical truths encompass all the sentences that are necessarily true because of any law of logic. Now, some laws of logic are truth functional laws of logic. So the ones that are necessarily true from that subset of logical laws would be the tautologies. And the exact same points apply to falsities or tautological falsities. These are the ones that are necessarily false because of truth functional logic, whereas these ones out here would be necessarily false because of other parts of logic. Now, what does this chart get at? This chart helps us understand this thing that we talked about before, the powers and limitations of Boole. You see, Boole can prove some sentences are necessarily true, and it also can prove some sentences are necessarily false. It can do that when what we're talking about are sentences that are necessarily true or false because of the truth functional connectives, like the Boolean connectives. But that doesn't mean for any part of logic at all, Boole can prove it. There's some things, some logical truths that fall outside the purview of Boole, and Boole's going to just be blind to those things. So all the ones that it can do necessarily true and false, that's the tautological realm, because the tautological concerns the truth functional realm. Tautologies are just the truth functional necessary truths. Let's look at some examples. So you should pause your videos. You should make sure you understand exactly why every single sentence in sort of dark red here is placed where it is. This is really essential. Step one, when you're trying to understand where any of these go, the first thing I recommend is doing a truth table for it. So if you do a truth table for P or not P, and you see that its truth function is all T's, then immediately you know it goes in here. It's a tautology. Or similarly, P and not P is all F's. So it goes in here, region 4. Those are like the starting points and the easiest ones to understand. Now, all the rest of these take a little bit more work. Let's look at the contingent truths. P likes logic. Let's just say that is true. And we're gonna symbolize that as sentence L. Then L would go out here as contingently true. And if you negate L, negation of a contingent truth just gives you a contingent falsehood. So that would go out here. Now, let's say P likes logic, but she doesn't like statistics. So S would go over here. This would be a contingent falsehood. If you negate a contingent falsehood, that would be a contingent truth. And this doesn't just apply to these literals. You can have complex sentences like L or S. This is contingently true because L is contingently true. And remember, if one of the disjuncts is true, then the whole disjunction is true. But look at this conjunction, L and S. This is false because S is false. And remember, one false conjunct makes for a false conjunction. Now, so regions 3 and 6 also, I think you can get your head around once you think about them. The hardest regions are regions 2 and 5. This is the thing I've come to, in my experience, people have the hardest time understanding, because how could there be some of logic that's not captured by Boole? People want everything to go in here to be in region 1 or region 3, but you have to realize region 2 exists. And I keep giving you the identity predicate, Pia is Pia, as our stock example of something that goes here. So the identity predicate, let's just formalize Pia is Pia as a sentence Z. That would be a logical truth. And if we negate Z, then it would be a logical falsehood. Another good example that I like is, for a logical falsehood, is A is less than A. We know that's necessarily false. So if we negate it, I'm just going to do this on the fly because I want this slide should be better. Let's see if we do this. If we negate Y, then that would be a logical truth, because it's not a tautology. If Y is an atomic sentence, and if you negate an atomic sentence, you still get something that's not a tautology, because it would go in a reference column, and the Y would go in a reference column, and the negation of it would have some T's and some F's. So this is not a tautology, but nonetheless, it's a logical truth, because it can never be the case that A is less than A. If A is less than A is a logical falsehood, then if we negate it, we get a logical truth. So there's a lot of sentences that can go out here. The logic of the less than relation is another good example besides the logic of the identity relation. Now, let me give you one color coding of this, because I think this is the thing I'm most proud of. I think this chart, this version of the chart, is really going to clarify what's going on here. So what do the colors mean now? The colors green And red, this is the stuff that truth tables can see. And oh, I guess in this yellow color. So basically, the truth tables can only distinguish three things. It can distinguish things that go in the green circle, things that go in the red circle, and then everything else. The truth table can't distinguish between any of these other regions. You see, if you give a truth function for the sentence y, it's going to have some t's and some f's. So it just comes out as contingent as far as the truth table knows. Same with like the negation of z, or same with just the letter L, or any of these other things out here. The truth table of these is going to have some t's and some f's in them. So truth tables only capture a fraction of logic, or they only see certain distinctions. They see this borderline, they see this circle, and then they see this borderline. So the truth table can tell you three things. It can tell you, does it go here, does it go here, or does it just go somewhere else? And so then you might be wondering, how do you, once we determined it goes neither 1 nor 4, how do you know whether it goes in 2, 3, 5, or 6? That you can't just use the truth table to tell you that. That's my point. You have to use your head. You have to think about, what does this mean? And what is the world really like? Does P actually like logic or not? This is where you have to look outside of logic and look into the world to distinguish whether it's contingently true or contingently false. Or you have to think about, what are the logical properties of things like the identity relation or the less than relation that might govern this? Okay, let me see if you've got it. So now, clearly, you just need to practice to see if you understand any of this. So here's some sentences. W is my new sentence. Seattle is in Washington, and here's not W. Tell me where those go. So pause your videos now and see if you can place those sentences. Okay, last chance to pause your videos. All right, hopefully you thought, Seattle's in Washington. Now, that's a fact about the world that I know is true. So that should go over here. W would go in contingent truths. And then the negation of W would go in contingent falsehoods. Okay, that was a pretty easy one. I'm going to just stop the video now because this covers the basics of the chart. Make sure you watch the next videos because we're going to talk about how to do some more complex sentences with the chart too. Okay, thanks.